Mr. President, I've been watching this debate as carefully as I possibly can. I think it's been very thoughtful. I think it's interesting that members of this body have read and looked at the same agreement and come to different conclusions. It's not surprising. A lot of complications of this. Nobody can really know exactly how everything's going to turn out, so it doesn't surprise me that people have come to different conclusions. I also agree with the members of this body when they say this is probably one of the most important votes they'll ever take. We're talking about a nuclear Iran and how we can potentially prevent that. And that obviously would be a threat to world peace. I know sitting back in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, well before I ever became a United States Senator, I heard members of both parties declare definitively we cannot allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon. Well, the sad fact is I think this agreement puts them on a path to obtain that weapon. I also agree with President Obama in his speech really chastising those of us that don't agree with him when he said this is a pretty simple decision. I think it is a pretty simple decision. I just come at it from a totally different perspective and obviously draw a completely different conclusion from that. But let me just read a couple quotes that have been brought forth by members of this body during this debate. Firstly, most importantly, this agreement cannot be based on hope or trust. History belies both in our experience with Iran. This deal is not the agreement I have long sought. Another senator, we are legitimizing a vast and expanding nuclear program in Iran. We are in effect rewarding years of the deception, deceit, and wanton disregard for international law. Another senator, this agreement with the duplicitous and untrustworthy Iranian regime falls short of what I'd envisioned. And yet another, this deal isn't perfect and no one trusts Iran. Now, Mr. President, I've really, in my 4.5 years in the United States Senate, I've been trying to find those areas of agreement. I agree with those comments. What's kind of surprising about all these quotes, these are quotes from individuals, senators, I won't name them, but senators that are going to vote to approve this awful deal. I think something else we can all agree on is that Iran is our enemy. Let me just detail a couple other quotes. Earlier this year, after his congregation broke out with a "Death to American" chant, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei said, yes, of course, yes, death to America, because America is the original source of this pressure. Death to America, death to America. And then only 2 days ago, the Supreme Leader said, I say that you, Israelis, will not see the coming 25 years, and God willing, there will not be something named the Zionist regime in the next 25 years. So I agree, we cannot trust Iran. We cannot trust the Supreme Leader. And I agree, Iran is our enemy. So my decision to vote for disapproval of this deal rests on a very simple premise. Why in the world would we ever enter a deal that will inject tens of billions and eventually hundreds of billions of dollars into our enemy, our avowed enemy, an enemy that I have to remind this body was responsible because of their IEDs for the killing of 196 troops in Iraq and many more wounded and maimed. A regime that back in the late 70s took 52 U.S. hostages for 444 days. That regime has not changed its behavior in all those intervening years. So they are our enemy. And again, let me point out, why in the world would we ever agree to a deal that will strengthen our enemy's economy and our enemy's military? It seems pretty obvious, and I agree with President Obama. This is a simple decision, but I disagree. He thinks it's a good deal. I think it's a very bad deal. Now, with my remaining time, now I want to be respectful of my colleagues. I do want to talk about what this debate, what this vote is actually about. This is not a straight up and down vote to approve for an international agreement that would be deemed a treaty. This body gave up our ability to deem this a treaty and provide the advice and consent when we voted on my amendment to deem it a treaty. President Obama, on his own authority, his Article 2 powers, said that no, something this important, this consequential is not a treaty, it's an executive agreement, and I can go it alone. And he basically did. Until the senator from Tennessee and Maryland came together and recognized the fact that part of this deal, a key part of this deal, is the waiver or lifting of the congressionally imposed sanctions that we put in place against the president's objection, by the way, in 2012. What this debate is all about is whether or not President Obama can retain that waiver authority. Regardless of how this turns out, President Obama, again, has negotiated this deal. He has run to the United Nations Security Council, got them to agree to it. The process will be put in place to lift those sanctions from the United Nations that, by the way, were put in place in resolutions that would have required for the suspension or halting of the uranium enrichment capability, which is not part of this deal, unfortunately. So it's extremely important for the American people to understand that we're not debating, we're not going to be voting on the actual deal itself, but we're going to be voting on something that's pretty weak involvement, pretty minor involvement, because President Obama has pretty well blocked us, blocked the American people from having a voice in a deal that is so important, so consequential, and what I believe is going to be so damaging to America's long-term interests, a deal that I believe really will put Iran on a path to obtain a nuclear weapon. We're going to be lifting the arms embargo. We're already lifting the embargo on ballistic missile technology. And once again, let me reiterate, we are going to be injecting tens of billions and eventually hundreds of billions of dollars to strengthen the economy and the military of our avowed enemy. It's a simple decision for me, which is why I will vote to disapprove this very bad deal. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.